Okay, so this is just a handout. I forgot to give it to you last week from the syllabus. All I added to the syllabus was just to specify that if we do have a class cancellation, I mark everyone as present. I didn't make that clear in the syllabus, so just so you know, you won't be marked absent if we have no class. All right. You have the quiz this week, so if you haven't taken the quiz, please do it. Do it as soon as possible. The end of the week. What month are we in? What's special about the month of March? St. Patrick's Day, yes. St. Patrick's Day is coming up. But about the whole month of March, is there anything special about it, Mr. Doherty? Mr. Doherty, you've lost your seat? Oh, there's a chair right up here, Mr. Doherty, right in front of me. Well, I know him too, but, you know. The month of March. What's going on in the month of March, Ms. Bowles? St. Patrick's Day, good. Yes. Anything else going on, Ms. Morrison? A particular import for your gender in particular? Huh? Oh, it's Women's History Month. Yes. Surprising that the man should know that before. Uh, Women's History Month, yes. We'll start talking about that on Thursday because I think I threw out my notes. I think I threw them out. So I have to print them out again for Women's History Month. So I'll talk about today is the feast day of St. Catherine Anne Drexel, American woman, already a saint, from Philly, the Philly area. Some of you might have heard of Drexel University and stuff like that. Anyway, so I'll talk about her on Thursday and other Catholic women on their way, either saints or on their way to sainthood. Anything else to say? I guess not. Moving back to Judaism. Turn this on here. My microphone is on. Seems to be. All right. There we go. All right. Where did we stop? Where did we stop? Yes. Thank you, Ms. Womble. Thank you. The Gemara. The Talmud. Yes, Mr. Sneed? The Talmud. Yeah. We're talking about the Talmud. And the Talmud is a combination of the Mishnah, okay, the oral tradition that was written down eventually, and then kind of the commentary or the opinions on it given by another group that we'll talk about in a second, called the Gemara, as Ms. Wombold said. Okay? I emailed a rabbi that I knew and another guy, Jewish scholar at Notre Dame, just to ask him some questions that I wasn't clear about. Remember, because I mentioned the Tosefta. Remember, it's the Tanaim add the Tosefta to the Mishnah. And my question was, why isn't it part of the Talmud? Why isn't it just added on? So you've got the Mishnah, the Tosefta from the Tanaim, then the Gemara, which Tosefta is usually taken out as a separate book. And I didn't know what its status was. What status does it have for a Jew in Jewish law? Apparently not a lot of status. Basically stuff that, the stuff in the Tosefta is stuff that didn't make the cut for the Mishnah. Okay, so it's not really studied very much. If you study Talmud, it's consulted, the Tosefta, but it's not really of high authoritative value, apparently, for determining law, certainly not for determining legal obligations under the law of Moses or Jewish law. It's just interesting, I guess. It's interesting information to have of other opinions at the time of the Mishnah, but were not apparently considered maybe authentic enough or whatever to be actually included in the Mishnah. But the Tosefta is there and it gets mentioned, so I mentioned it. All right, moving on. The next part of the Talmud is the Gemara. The Gemara, which in Aramaic, it's an Aramaic word, related language to Hebrew. It means completion. And that's kind of what the Gemara does. It completes the Mishnah. The Mishnah is repetition, yes? So repeating what the ancient oral tradition was, okay? And then the Gemara completes it by collecting another group called the Amoraim, or the Amoras, collecting their commentary on the Mishnah. So their commentary on the Mishnah, and then commentary within commentary. Okay, so this group, the spokesman, the Amora, or Amoras, or Amoraim, in Hebrew plural, again, Aramaic, the spokesman. All right, and that's the name for these ancient Jewish scholars whose discussions were recorded and attached onto the Mishnah as a commentary. They complete the Mishnah in a manner of speaking. Nothing more was added on to it. All right. You want to say about that? Show the page. Yeah. Oh, I got a better picture here than this. I got to put it on revise my PowerPoint because I found a better picture of a Talmud page. Anyways, yeah. So the Talmud, as you can see, is not in English. Although there are English translations of the Talmud that you can find online on the internet, but you have to be careful because, from what I'm understanding, from what I can figure out, that the language, which is kind of a combination of Hebrew and Aramaic, if I remember correctly, again from my rabbi friend whom I emailed, and the other dude at Notre Dame, the Mishnah is written in Hebrew, and the Gemara is written in Aramaic, which is a related language to Hebrew, but it's not the same language. Anyways, so it's written in two different languages, two related but different languages. And whatchamacallit, what was I going to say? So it's in Hebrew, but the script is Hebrew. It's in this kind of block lettering that people associate with the Hebrew language. Can't see it. It's not great. You know what? Maybe I'll find something online. Get a better picture online. Talmud page. Yeah, here we go. Which one do I want to use, though? Oh, that might be helpful. Let's see how that is. Let's see how that comes up. Color code. Ah! Come on. Here we go. It's kind of small. Whoops. Alright, I don't care. We use cookies. Here we go. Can you see that? Is that okay? You can't? Alright. Yes? No? Anyways. Yeah, so in the middle of if you look at a Talmud, see that the Hebrew lettering, the Hebrew alphabet is used, even for Aramaic. And in the middle, you have the Mishnah. That's color-coded pink here. Would be the Mishnah text, the oral, which is written in very terse language. It's very brief, really. And then the Gemara is attached immediately to it, which is this kind of, creamish colored. Okay, so the Gemara comes right after it with the commentary of the Amoraim. God bless you. So that's the essential. These are the essential components of any Talmud page: the Mishnah and then the Gemara. Okay, and then what's all around it is other commentary and information, which is all color coded here. The most important after the Gemara would be this from this Rabbi Rashi. Where is it? Rashi, who lived, as you can see, like 1,000 years ago. Very famous rabbi. His name was Solomon ben Isaac, but he's known as Rashi. It's an acronym for Rabbi Shlomo ben Yitzchak. You take the R, take the you take the R, you take the sh from Shlomo, and you take the yi from Yitzhak, just like with Tanakh, you get Rashi. Okay, I mean, the Jews were doing this before rappers thought of this, right? All these weird names with all sorts of acronyms, and all like a lot of rabbis, and that's how they talk about them. They don't say, well, Rabbi Solomon said, no, it's Rashi, or Rabbag, a Rambam, a Rambanam, a Ragbal, or they call them by the name of their books that they wrote. So it's like its own coded language that the Jews are speaking to each other, religious Jews are speaking to each other. So it can be very hard to disentangle and understand. At least I find it hard. But anyways, Rashi is a major rabbi, and his commentary from 1,000 years ago gets pride of place. It's always placed here next to the spine of the book, right here. It's very important. All this in light blue, bluish stuff. And then his children commented on his comments, and their comments are put here on the other side, their additional comments. And then you have all sorts of other additional things, other commentary from some other famous rabbis. Rabbi Nassim from the country of Tunisia. I don't know who that is, but Jews would know. References to the Bible, references to other stuff, all sorts of other information. But if you can kind of, I guess, pardon my French, I guess you could say, the clutter around, it's essentially Mishnah Gemara. You see, Mishnah Gemara, and this is all further commentary and information. All right, you're studying. Stick with the center of the page if you're studying Talmud. Basically, stick with the center of the page, and you'll be all right. And then look at the other stuff. The first thing you look at you look at Mishnah, then you look at Gemara. Yeah, because this is. And then you look at Rashi. Oh, there he is, Rabbi Solomon ben Isaac, or Rashi. That's usually how the process of studying Torah of Talmud goes. You start with the Mishnah itself, then you go to the Gemara, and then you go to Rashi's commentary. All right. We'll talk about that. Oh, before I do that. All right, so I gave you a reading from a translation of the Talmud. Which translation? This is Watkinson, 1903, so it's in the public domain. Okay, it's from a selection from one of the Talmuds. I'll talk about the Talmud. There are different Talmuds in a second. I don't know if this was exactly the reading I gave to you to read. Was it? Does it look familiar to anybody? Does anyone remember? Ms. Garrity, do you remember the reading from the Talmud? No? Does anyone remember the reading from the Talmud? I think it was this. No, the reading from the Talmud. Miss Bellagio, do you remember it? What it was about? Oh, Miss Wamba, stop thinking. I've told you, please, people, stop trying to think. That's not what university is for. I told you before. You get a piece of paper and you party. That's it. Those are your two goals, Miss Wallace. No, but that's a good answer. But no, I know what you're referring to. Excellent. It's an excellent attempt. But no, that's not what I'm looking for. But I appreciate it. What am I doing here? I'm talking to you. Where I am. The Talmud, yes. Oh, yeah. Just, just go to Canvas. It's on Canvas. Go into modules. I think it's modules. And all the readings are there. Even if you didn't read it, you go into modules, you open it up in your computer, it's right there. You say, oh, yeah, Dr. Dunn, it's this. So whether you read it or not, you're telling me, right? Right, Ms. Kepner? I mean, proactive, right? Cassiano is like, that, that, Anyways, Ms. Moore, would you like to read this selection from the Talmud? Or just the beginning part? I know it's long, just the top part, the first part. You want to come up and come closer? Yeah, come on. Come on up. All right. Huh? Sound it out. Beth, Shem. Good. Keep going. Why don't you just come up? Why don't you just come up? Hillel, yeah. Per Beth Hillel what? Permits it. All right. Beth Hillel permits it. I love you, Lord. And I love my students. All right. So that's the Mishnah. That's the Mishnah. Okay. That's the oral law. Okay. Basically, what is the law? Law. Well, in the law of God, you can't do work on the Sabbath. You know, the seventh day of every week is dedicated to the Lord and to rest. So, what you call it, a religious Jew is not supposed to do any kind of work on the Sabbath. And there are all sorts of things that the law in Torah, in the Tanakh, the Torah, the law of Moses, it specifies certain actions that you can't do, like light a fire. Like light a fire. You can't make a fire on the Sabbath. All right. So this is addressing that. Okay, this instance. So we have the law that's given to Moses, the written law, rest on the Sabbath, don't make a fire. But now we have the oral law. Like, well, what does that mean? What about if how do you cook food then on the Sabbath? Or do you? Are you allowed to cook food on the Sabbath? Which would mean you'd have to create a fire in the fireplace or in the stove, because this, of course, is written like almost 1,000 years ago, right? Or 2,000, no, 1,500 years ago, yes, or longer, maybe 2,000 years ago. So no gas or electric. So what is it? Cooked food, and can you cook food as well? Like, let's say you know you don't start a fire to heat up the stove. Can you actually cook food with a fire if there's still a fire? Let's say you start a fire on Friday, the day before Saturday, okay, and the fire is still burning on Saturday and through Saturday to Sabbath. Well, you didn't start it. You didn't make a fire technically, right? So you haven't technically broken the law, the religious law. Nevertheless, can you use that fire to cook food or just keep food warm? Does actually cooking the food kind of cross a line where you've kind of broken the Sabbath, you're doing work, whereas just warming the food up is just warming the food up. You're not cooking it. Okay, so that's another question. So cooked food can be put on a stove that's heated with straw or stubble, but if the stove is heated with like oil, like the pulp of a poppy seed, so oil and stuff like that, or wood, then you can't do it unless you take out the coals and cover the ashes. I guess so. There's no fire burning, unless you take out the coals. All right, so that's the tradition that the tradition that comes down. All right, but now you have Beth Shammai and Beth Hillel, these two women, arguing over it. They're not two women, Perez. Beth means house in Hebrew. Beit Hillel and Beit, the house of Hillel, the Beit Hillel, the Beit Shammai, the house of Hillel. Hillel and Shammai! Two very famous Tanaim, from before the time of Jesus, you know? Or around, no, were they around the time of Jesus or just before the time of Jesus? I think they were before the time of Jesus. Yeah. Anyways, were two big, they're called houses because they were schools of thought. They were two rabbis, Hillel and Shammai, and they had all their students and their disciples. So they were like a school of thought, a house, a faith. Okay, so now we get the opinion of the disciples of Shammai, who was usually Mr. Christmas, the stricter of the two. Strict. That's how I remember it. Shammai is strict. Hillel, on the other hand, Mr. Christmas, is happy. More lenient. Usually the disciples of Rabbi Shammai give a stricter understanding of the Mishnah or the oral Torah than the Hillelites, you might say. So Shammai says it's permissible only if you're keeping the food warm, but you cannot cook it. That crosses a line. Whereas Hillel says you can do both. See? More lenient, right? You can do both. Shammai says the food, if you take the food off the stove, you can't put it back on. Right? And Mr. Doherty, you're substituted, you can't go back on the field, right? This is American football where, everyone's running on and off. But soccer and other sports, you go off, you can't come back on. So you take, a pot of food off, you can't put it back on. Whereas Hillel and his disciples say, it's okay. It's all right. If you take it off, you can put it back on. You haven't broken anything. All right? So, there's the difference. Now discuss. You as a Jewish man, and, yes, women were not typically taught Talmud, but, what do you think they're doing in the yeshivas, the young men? You study, what does it mean to study Talmud? Well, now you have to come up with your own opinion on what you're supposed to do here, because, do you follow Shammai or do you follow Hillel, and why do you follow them? Well, let's look then at the Gemara, the additional comments, the completion. Come in here, come in here. Frequent refrain in the Talmud. The rabbi saying to his students, come in here, and I will tell you what I think. First, there are two parts in our Mishnah. Okay? There are two parts. First part they're identifying is if the point of controversy is the leaving of food on the stove, if it had been there before, then this is our explanation. Okay? On a stove heated with straw or stubble, you can leave it alone. But if it was oil or wood, no. I don't know why that makes any difference. I can only imagine that's something to do with, it keeps on burning, so fire is still being made if it's wood or oil, whereas I guess with stubble it burns more quickly and burns out. So whatever, I can only imagine that's why it's such an issue. But anyways, yeah. And then so Beth Shammai, and then they note again, or someone does, it doesn't say who this is, but notes again, the house of Shammai says only those things that are to be kept warm, but Hillel says you can keep it warm and even maybe it could be recooked. It's okay. But what do we do with that? What do we think about that? Come in here again. Come in here. And here's where we get into, what is the typical of the Talmud, the rabbis, the commentary on the commentary and the commentary, rabbis citing the authority of other rabbis, citing the authority of other rabbis, to the point where you don't even know sometimes who's actually making the statement. So Rabbi Helbo, in the name of Rabbi Hannah ben Gurion, Okay, so he's speaking in his name. So I guess maybe he was his student, so he's giving the opinion of his teacher. And I guess Gorion was quoting to him Rob, which again is a nickname for a famous rabbi from Babylon, the school of the Jews living in Babylon. But, could be Helbo's quoting Rob. It's not clear. The Mishnah speaks only about putting food on the stove. But as to putting it in the stove, that's a different matter. That you can't definitely do. So now apparently Rabbi Helbo is introducing another issue, I guess brought up by his teacher, brought up by Rob, that, the Mishnah is like, okay, it's only concerned with putting stuff on top of the stove. But if it's a question of opening the stove up and putting something into it, which I guess would just be considered more work or whatever, I'm assuming, that's certainly forbidden. All right, so you're getting a sense here of what's going on in the Talmud and how it works, and the whole, as a Jew, you study the Talmud, and you study these opinions, and you come up with your own understanding of what it means. You yourself are supposed to write your own commentary in a way, or you follow some authoritative rabbi. A lot of Jews, I think, just find some rebbe, holy man, and will follow his opinions on, what they're supposed to do in this case. How do you interpret Shammai and Hillel's opinions, or what we should do in this case, Rebbe? This is what you should do. Okay, you do what the Rebbe says. But Talmud study, this is all part of Talmud study. Going through these things and thinking about them for yourself. And I will tell you that, the Hebrew, or this is English. This is an English translation. But if you look at the Hebrew, you can find the Hebrew online or the Aramaic, and some of it is translated. It's very sparse text. A lot of what you see here is filler. They filled in English. They've had to fill in because the Hebrew, it says, for example, in the email I was asked, I gave an example in the email that I sent to my rabbi friend because I was trying to figure out how to read the Talmud, because the Hebrew text says, an opinion of Rabbi Meir contradicted an opinion of Rabbi Meir. Two Tanaim, an opinion of Rabbi Eliezer contradicted an opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. That's it. Okay, all right. That's all you got to work with. That's in the original text. That's why you have to go to yeshiva to learn how to study Talmud, because it's like all sorts of legal language and legalese and also very technical stuff, which indicates how you're supposed to interpret the passages. What they do in the translations, like this one I'm showing you here, Rodkinson's, they stick in all sorts of extra stuff in between the actual language, where from like Rashi's commentary or other commentaries, what others have thought the sense is, to make it readable. But just know that when you're looking at this on the PowerPoint, or you're reading the actual Talmud that I gave you or stuff like that, it's a translation. But like my rabbi friend at Seton Hall, Rabbi Grill, told me in his email, he said, you never use the translations. You don't use them. You have to go from you have to learn the original language, because the translations are obviously unreliable. They're not, they're trying to interpret it for someone who doesn't know Talmud and hasn't studied it. Okay? But it gives you a sense of what's going on in the Talmud. Okay? Even if it's not exactly what's in the Talmud. All right. There are two versions of the Talmud, because there were two communities. I mentioned, that Rob was a famous rabbi from Babylon, Iraq. Okay, I mentioned the exile, yes, that a lot of Jews were taken to the ancient Iraq, or Babylonia. Okay, so there was a Jewish community there. So you have a Talmud that arises amongst the Jews of Iraq, in Babylon. But you also had some Jews mentioned the Romans, right, in 70 A.D. and the destruction of the temple. You had Jews who were living in Palestine, in Judea, who were there. And so they have a version of the Talmud which arises amongst the Jewish community in Palestine called, well, it's called variously the Palestinian Talmud or the Jerusalem Talmud. So there are two versions. Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud or the Palestinian Talmud, and the Talmud Babli or Bavli, Babli being the name for Babylon in Hebrew. So the Babylonian Talmud. Yerushalmi, you can see it started in Israel, the land of Israel, in 500 AD, around the time it was composed. And Babli comes from Iraq, Babylon, 600. So Yerushalmi is the older of the two. Ms. Wombold. How's it going? What's going on? Thank you. Nevertheless, even though Yerushalmi is the older of the two by a century, Babli is the one that has supremacy amongst Jews today. That's the Talmud that, if you go to yeshiva, that's the one you study. Even though you might consult Yerushalmi, but Babli is the one that is the standard for studying Talmud. Even though there's the second one. Okay. What else do I want to say about the Talmud? Anything else? We'll get to this in a second. I guess the only thing of interest that pops into my mind about the Talmud is that it is incomplete. Neither version of the Talmud is complete. You have the 6 orders of the Mishnah, okay? But there are a whole bunch of orders, Sedarim, of Mishnah that you have mostly regarding the temple and temple worship and stuff like that have no Gemara at all. No Gemara at all. You just have the Mishnah. And so again, I was asking my rabbi friend and the professor at Notre Dame, what do you do with that, And well, you ignore it, because it's not relevant anymore because there's no temple. I guess eventually, if the temple were to be rebuilt, the third temple, then the rabbis would have to start making some decisions. But since the temple had been destroyed, the priesthood couldn't function in the temple. There was no reason. They preserved the Mishnahs, they kept that, but there's no reason to write Gemara on it or give opinions on it because no one could practice it anymore in the land of Israel. So each one is incomplete. All right. I guess that's all I want to say about that. Is this our buddy? Yeah. Okay. I want to turn up the sound. All right. There we go. All right. All right. So just a little example of, following the law of God. That in the law, God tells Moses that before you eat food, you have to wash your hands. Okay. Doesn't tell you how. God doesn't tell Moses how. The process, or whatever. So you have to interpret. Then you look to the Mishnah. You look to the oral tradition. So how do the rabbis say? How do Jews interpret the law in practice? So this is an example of that. In this case, how do you prepare your hands to eat bread? Eat bread. Wash your hands in preparation for eating bread. Yes, we're going to watch it over again because. No, he just says jewelry, but he leaves his watch on. So, you know, patriarchal. Women have to take their jewelry off, but the dudes get to leave. How you doing? Oh, I'm glad. Thank you. Yes, a natwa, a special cup. That you only use for ritual purifications. Okay, so this is not a coffee cup. If you go to some Jewish person's home and you see a cup like this with two handles on it, don't put your cocoa in it. All right, please. If you've learned anything from this class, because it's a sacred object. It's for sacred things. It's not a profane object. Okay? And it has two hands. Okay? You put water in it, and you pour the water on your hands, because your hands might be ritually unclean. Maybe you've touched a dead body or something. Or, well, as some of you know from your assignment, maybe you're reading Torah. You were touching a Torah scroll and it defiled your hands. So you have to ritually purify your hands before you can eat food. Okay? So this is going through this process of ritual purification. Okay, how do you wash your hands? With water. Okay, obviously, pure water. Has to be water. Why does it have two handles on it? Why does it have two handles on it, do you think? What do you think, Mr. Oriold? Why two handles? You don't know. Do you have any theories? Huh? Ah! Good. That's very good. Yeah. Because both your hands are dirty, right? They're both ritually impure. Okay? So when you use, what did he say? You use your left hand first to cleanse your right hand, right? Start with the left hand. So his left hand is ritually unclean, and he's cleansing his right hand. So he holds it with the left, okay? Because if there were only one handle, Ms. Garrity, then that handle would become ritually unclean from his left hand touching it. So when he goes to then, take the cup and then cleanse his left hand, he's going to ritually impurify his right hand all over again, right? You got to think about these things, Mr. Christmas. Cross-contamination. You know what I'm saying? It's a version of religious form of cross-contamination, You don't use the same cutting board for meat and vegetables. Use different cutting boards. Unless you work at Chipotle. And you all know what happens then. Anyways. So that's why, you're right, Mr. Oriole. Two handles, because his left hand is unclean. So now he's going to purify his right hand. Okay, so whoops, sorry. So now it's purified. And notice that just to make sure, he does it twice. You don't just do it once. That's not enough. You do it twice over the hand. And in some interpretations, you do it 3 times over the hand. Okay, not just twice. But he does it twice. So now his right hand is purified, so we can now we can take the right handle, which is not unclean, not only onto the left one, and now purify his left hand. Okay. Now my question is, what do you do with the cup? I mean, if you have to have 2 handles, if the handles become unclean, so you don't have to have 2 so you don't touch the unclean one. I mean, how do you purify the cup? You just put it in the dishwasher or something? You wash it? I don't know. I'd have to ask. I have to send my rabbi friend an email on that one too. But anyways, now his hands are ritually purified, and so it's not just a purification. There's a blessing. There's a blessing. You bless God. Baruch hara atah Adonai. Blessed be the Lord, Eloheinu, our God, the King of eternity. That I know. The next part is I always stumble. Why is it doing that? Why would it do that? I'm clicking on the video. All right. Asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzeyavanu. Okay. Who, what is that? Kidshanu. I always forget what kidshanu means, but whatever. Who is, well, but here we see mitzvah, commandment, okay, vatzevanu. All right. He has given us his laws and his commandments, I think is what it's saying, about the washing of hands. Netilat, which means washing. Al, about netilat, washing. Yadayim, dayim means hands. So it gave us the commandments, and we bless God for his commandments about how we are to wash our hands. All right. Now, he says you have a nigun. Sometimes they're supposed to be, in some interpretations, you're supposed to sing a song. Or if you can't sing the song, you just hum, because that's equivalent to singing a song, even though you're not singing words. You just go, all right. Why, so again, that's all part of the interpretation of how you're supposed to do it. The nigun, the wordless, basically you're humming. And then we get to eating the bread. And even bread, you have to eat it in a certain way. Obviously, you have to eat it with purified hands. Okay, but you have to say a blessing over it again. So you basically the same thing, Ms. Kepner. Blessed are you, O Lord, our God, the God eternal, the King eternal, who has given us your commands about the eating of bread. Right, and the bread is cut and then salted, and the person eats it first. I don't think that's meant to be rude. I had to give my own kind of supposition about why, probably to show that the food is okay to eat. Not meaning to be rude, I don't think. Okay, and then you salt the bread and you hand it out. Okay, but you can't just eat the bread. There's even a ritual for eating food. You have to bless God first. Okay. Anything else I want to say about that? We got the blessing. Slice to give it. All right. All right. So that's an observant Jew, more or less. I think he's probably a Reformed Jew, a more liberal variety. Nevertheless, in their interpretation, that's how they do it. If you were an Orthodox Jew, more of a more conservative variety, there might be different things that you would expect to be done. Okay? But just, an example of Jewish ritual. You have the law, wash your hands before eating, but then how do you practice it? God doesn't say anything about washing your hands with a cup. Couldn't you just wash your hands under the sink? Or if you're outside, in a river or something, flowing water, just wash your hands. Or if you have a bowl of water, just wash your hands. You have to use a special cup. Apparently you do, because the rabbis decided. Do you have to say a blessing? God doesn't say to say a blessing. He just says in the law of Moses, to purify your hands if they're unclean. Right. God doesn't give a particular blessing to say, so this blessing has been added by tradition. So you see how it's starting to work? The oral tradition comes into play. Dear Lord. All right. Jewish, so we're done with the scriptures, the sacred writings. And we're kind of done, I guess, with the oral tradition. What are their beliefs, Miss Hancock? What are their beliefs? Yes. The Shema. Start with the Shema. All right. This is as close as you're going to get in Judaism to a statement of belief. Okay, it is considered the core statement of Jewish belief about the oneness of God, His unity, and His special relationship with Israel. So we get a twofer here. We get monotheism, okay, and election in this phrase, or in this statement, I should say. Deuteronomy 6, chapter 6, verses 4 through 5. Who'd like to read this on the PowerPoint? Mr. Sneed. All right, Mr. Is that what you tell your coach when he says to go in? Go in, we need you, Sneed. No. All right, who else? Let's see. Who else? Mr. Sinsky? Thank you, Mr. Sinsky. Yeah, the whole thing. Excellent. The book of Deuteronomy, chapter 6. Okay? Moses is giving a repeat of the law he received from God in the book of Deuteronomy, as I told you, which means the second law, yes? So I told you it's a repeat of a lot of the material that appears in the books of Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. Okay? And in the process, he makes this statement of faith, which is, a core statement of Jewish faith, an essential statement of Jewish faith. Okay? I mean, religious Jews read this or pray this every morning and evening. They say the Shema. And you have to say the Shema. It's an essential prayer of the Jew. Shema, which comes from, the verb shama, which means to hear. Okay, it's in the imperative. So Shema, or Shema, hear Israel, people of Israel. Yahweh, or the Lord, is our God. Yahweh only. Okay? And this can be understood as Yahweh only, as there's only Yahweh is one, meaning He's unitary. There's only one God, in the sense of monotheism, or it could be understood in the sense that He's the only God that we worship as Jews, no other God. Okay, and then the Lord is our God. He's Eloheinu. He's our God. So election, we are His people. He has chosen us. Okay, so let me see if I do that. Oh, hold on a second. Let's see if I. Hold on a second. Nah. All right. Okay. Now, I mean, what does, there's a command here. I mean, there's a statement of belief here. Okay, God is our God, only God.
And so you should love God with your whole heart and being and strength. Okay, I kind of get that. With your whole purpose, right? All right. But it's a command. You're supposed to repeat it to your children over and over again. It's a command of God. Recite these words when you're home or traveling, when you get up or when you lie down. So when you get up in the morning, you say the Shema. When you lay down for bed, you say the Shema, right? Because God commanded it. It's a command. Bind the words on your arm as a sign, and also tie them to your head like a pendant on your forehead. All right? How do you do that? I don't know. Are you supposed to tattoo the Shema, the statement of the Shema, on your arm? Well, it says bind, to tie it. So how do you do that? Well, if you're an observant Jew, I think I showed you the Tefillin before, didn't I? No, I didn't think I showed. But, religious Jews, when they pray, have little black boxes in which the Shema has been written on a piece of paper, put in a little black box, and they literally, actually tie it around their heads when they pray, and they tie it around their left arms. So they take the command literally. God says you're supposed to do. Bind the words of the Shema to your arm and to your head. All right, so they do it. Some do. Write it on your doorposts. That's where the mezuzah comes in. If any of you lived near a Jewish neighborhood or had Jewish neighbors, you might have seen some kind of box by the front door that they had that if they were observant, they would touch when they come in. When they leave, touch, box, yes, no, a mezuzah. Called a mezuzah. In which is placed a scroll on which is written the Shema. And as God commanded, placed on the doorpost of the house. The lintel. A second. Sorry. Oops. I gotta go to confession.
No, I did fully charge it, but I probably should have charged it during the break. Anyways, I got my phone recording me, so I just have to put the audio with video.
I hate this. I can't rely on it. It's a good idea, but I can't rely on it. It doesn't charge long enough. Yeah. Mezuzah. And some religious Jews interpret, because God doesn't specify, he says doorposts, doesn't specify front door, back door, inside door. Some religious Jews put a mezuzah on every lintel in the house, all the doorposts, the doorways, because God doesn't say which door, how many doors. He also, Ms. Boaggio, doesn't tell you whether to put the mezuzah, post the Shema straight up and down, or should it be on like this? Should it be horizontally affixed to the doorpost? Or does God want it vertically fixed? I know I can never figure the two. Does God want it horizontally fixed, or does he want it vertically fixed? Doesn't say, right? What do you do, Mr. Zelke? What if the God of Israel shows up, to check your mezuzah, see if you put the Shema on your doorpost. He's looking. He's there with his kid. And your mezuzah's off kilter. Whoa, why is it like off kilter? Well, because Lord, you didn't tell us which way it's supposed to go. So we have it put the mezuzah, diagonally, because then it's kind of vertical and also kind of horizontal, isn't it, Mr. Zelke? It's kind of both. So the Lord has a complaint. You got him. You got him. See? You can't punish me, Lord. It is vertical. Yeah, but it's not horizontal. Well, look, it's... Yeah, so, again, you have the command. I know I am not a Jew. I mean, I do believe, I read the book of Deuteronomy as a Christian. I would take that statement as metaphorical, that, you're supposed to give your whole life to the love of God and stuff like that. And, I take these as metaphors. I don't literally think I'm supposed to bind these words of Scripture to my head, or obviously, because you don't see me do it. And you don't see Catholics do it in a Catholic church or anything, or Christians do it. Some Christians do, like Messianic Christians. Yeah, but the Jews don't, because you're not sure. Unless God told you he was speaking a metaphor, you don't know. So you have to assume that he means it actually. God! Monotheism. There is one God. Okay. That monotheism distinguishes Judaism from not just the surrounding religions of the Near East, but the religions of the world. Okay, it is the Jews' unique view of the supernatural, of unity. There is one unique. God is unique. There is no other. He's not the one God in the sense of the best of all the gods. He's not one God in the sense of the only God we worship, but there are other gods that we don't worship. No, he's absolutely unique. And this idea has to develop even amongst the Jews. I mean, that's not the earliest idea that we find if you read the Jewish sacred writings in the Bible, not the Bible, but the Tanakh. This idea develops, okay? Originally it seems that the Israelites just worshipped their God as the greatest of the gods. It was, amongst other gods of the region, and they didn't worship the other gods. They're focused primarily on this one God, which scholars call henotheism, from the Greek word for one, hen, which means one, okay, which is not the same as monotheism. Monotheism means absolutely one God only. Henotheism means there's one God that you have a special relationship, but, there might be other gods and goddesses and spirits that you have nothing to do with. And if we look at Jewish writings, that seems to have been the case, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. If you did the readings for Judaism from the book of Genesis, maybe you did, maybe you didn't, but that's a frequent way that God, the God of Jews, describes himself. I'm the God of your ancestors. Doesn't say he's the only God, but he's the only God that your fathers worshipped, and that's why you, sons of Israel, only worship me. Later on, monotheism will be read into that, like God is the only God, of course. But if you actually read the text as it is, it doesn't say that. It says, I'm the God of your ancestors. I saved you from Egypt. Therefore, you owe me worship. You don't worship other gods. You don't make idols of other gods. And in the Jewish writings, God, it's translated almost always in the singular, God, in translation. But the Hebrew is almost always plural. Elohim, gods, the gods. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, literally in Hebrew, it's, at the start of everything, the gods created the skies and the earth. Plural. Gods. But the verb is always singular, so that tells you something. So it actually should be, it's kind of like saying, when everything started, the gods creates the heaven. It's using the singular form. So it's always in the Hebrew, even though the noun is plural, gods, more than one God, the verb is always singular. Why would they do that? Well, it's probably because it's a remnant of maybe a longer phrase like God of gods, something like that. The God of gods created, God, and it just got shortened to like gods. Okay, but they weren't saying that there were many gods. They weren't polytheists, or it's meant to indicate like he's the highest of the gods. Again, henotheism probably. The God of gods created everything, created the heavens and the earth. He is all of the gods wrapped into one. None of the gods is greater than him. Okay. He is even the ruler amongst the gods, like the king of the gods. And that's sometimes how, that's even sometimes how in like the early poetry in the Bible, like in the book of Psalms, that's sometimes how God is described. He's the king of the council of gods. He's the main God, the God of gods. So the verb is always singular, even though the noun is plural. But the idea develops through time, okay, and reflection, I guess. All right, hold on a second here. Hold on a second. All right, I'll come back to this in a second. It develops that Yahweh, which is the name for the Jewish God apparently, is not just the God of the Jews alone, or this particular region of the world and Canaan, or Palestine, or whatever you want to call it, Israel, but he's actually the God of everything, the God who created the universe, the God of every nation, and in fact, he's the only God. So this idea starts developing. Mainly it seems through the prophets. Remember the Nevi'im, the books of the prophets, the various prophets. If you do read the prophets, they keep telling the Jews, stop worshiping other gods, including Yahweh. It's only Yahweh. Yeah, they have to keep reminding the Jewish people that, number one, the relationship is only with this one God, the God of your fathers, your ancestors, and that God is the only God. So it's really the prophets who are the prime movers of this idea. Most everyday Israelites at the time, they worshiped Yahweh, but they might have actually worshipped, had shrines to other lesser gods, Baal, stuff like that, Asherah. And so we see, remnants of this in the Jewish scriptures, like, and this is the book of Genesis, chapter 31. All right, this man Laban is, I think he's the uncle. I think he's Jacob's uncle, Jacob Israel. Okay, and they're talking, and they're going to make a contract, an agreement between each other. So they make a mound of dirt, like an altar, and a sacred pillar, like a piece of a tree or a piece of wood you stick in the ground as a witness of your contract. And these pillars could also be used for the worship of gods, or in the worship of God. So they establish a sacred pillar. The mound will be a witness. The pillar will be a witness that basically it's a peace treaty. You see, I won't attack you. I won't go into your territory to attack you, and you won't pass into my territory, establishing the boundaries of their territories. So it's like a peace treaty between Laban and his nephew, Jacob Israel. And then they seal it by making a pledge or witnessing before, apparently, the God that each one worships. So may the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, God of their father, judge between us. So the God of Abraham would be Jacob's grandfather, his ancestor, Abraham. So he worships the God of Abraham. But Laban worships the God of Nahor, his ancestor, which is whatever. I don't know. So they each swear by their different gods. Jacob swears by the God of Israel, but Jacob Israel, the God of Abraham. And then Jacob took the oath by the fear of his father Isaac. Okay, Isaac is, Abraham is Jacob's grandfather. Okay, and Isaac is his father. So he also takes an oath apparently by his father's God, which would be the God of Abraham. So same difference, it's the same thing. But he uses this terminology, the fear of his father, this metaphor of fear for the name of God, or for the God of Abraham. It's interesting, old terminology. And then they offered a sacrifice. They offered a sacrifice to kind of seal the contract and stuff like that. Any of you in business or whatever, well, somebody might be later on, or you're going to have contract negotiations. What do? You all go out to dinner afterwards or something, once you, maybe, but you go out to dinner and celebrate the contract that you, kind of like the same idea. You establish the contract, you swear to the contract, you put your signature on it in the name of your gods here, and then, you go out to dinner afterwards to celebrate. All righty. Oh yeah, the prophet Isaiah. This is an example of. I'll go back to that. This is just an example of. This is one of the prophets. This prophet Isaiah, one of the major prophets. I told you, and yeah, he's one of those who is very clear about that. The God that the Israelites worship is really the only God. So this is just an example. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but in Isaiah chapter 46, this is not the only place where Isaiah reveals this or talks about this. I am God, there is no other. I am God, there is none like me. Okay, and here we have both the singular and the plural. El, which is the Hebrew word for God, like Allah in Arabic, related language. And then this is the plural, Elohim. I am God's. So he combines the idea, the plural and the singular. He's making very clear, there is no other God but me. And the idea of God, I'll move on from this, I'm not going to do that. The idea of God changes as well. If you read some of the earlier literature in the Bible, the Jewish God is kind of represented in human form, with emotions, and doing things, having whatever, but is in a very kind of concrete way, like in the stories. Well, as I told you, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God is presented in the very beginning of the Jewish Bible as a builder, a construction God. He builds, he sets up the earth and he builds the sky like a roof over the earth. And after 6 days of work, he takes a break, he takes a rest, Then he creates creatures on this thing that he builds, like human beings. And puts them in a little garden that he makes, So God's also kind of a gardener. Well, you have to do landscaping, right? That's part of, being a contractor, right? Landscaping as well. You got to landscape. So he makes a little garden and puts these creatures, these human creatures, in the garden. He walks through the garden during the day. Walks around the garden. This is God, etc. and so forth. Another, he's described as having nostrils and nose, and getting angry. And, when he gets angry, smoke comes out of his nose. He gets really angry. He likes a good meal. That's why he likes sacrifice, barbecue. He likes the fat of the barbecue. He's described. So the God of Israel in some of the early writings is described in very concrete ways, which expected. That's how how a lot of people seem to think. They thought about God in that. How else are they supposed to think about their gods? They think about them as like us, like humans. But the prophets again kind of step in and say, no, that's not what God is. God has no form. He doesn't have a body. He is pure spirit. That's why you don't make any images or idols of him. Okay? And he's perfect. He's all perfect. So, he doesn't need anything from us. He doesn't need to eat the flesh of bulls and rams and sheep and goats in the temple. Okay, they weren't rejecting temple worship because God commanded it, but they were saying, it's not like you need to give God a breakfast and dinner every day at the temple. He doesn't need sustenance. He's not that kind of God. He is completely perfect. Yes, it says that God built the sky and establish the pillars of the earth and stuff like that. It sounds like construction. But the Hebrew verb that's consistently used means create, not making something. Like God makes something from something else. It's creative. God just wills it into existence. He doesn't have to put any effort into it. So God is the creator, not the maker of the universe, as maybe early Jews kind of considered him or imagined him. He's not bound to any place. He doesn't live in the Garden of Eden. Nor does he even live in the temple, which a lot of Jews believe. The temple was really God's house. God lived there. And he is good. Yes, the Bible says that God gets angry and enraged and smoke comes out of his nostrils, Miss Perfield. Yes, you don't want to mess with the God of Israel. You don't want to piss him off. But he is good. If it's anger, it's a righteous anger. It's because we aren't doing what he wants us to do. We're sinning. We're violating our covenant with him. But God is good, which, as we know from studying Hinduism, is not, there are good gods and bad gods in Hinduism, and that's okay. You worship all of them, right? If you're a Hindu, and even the demons might be fulfilling their dharmas properly, because that's what they're supposed to be, demons. You're going to be a bad god, be the baddest stinking god you can be, right, Mr. Zelke? Not so for the Israelites. God is perfectly good. Well, then how do you explain the stuff about him getting angry or like killing people's babies and stuff? That's for another cup of coffee, don't worry. And he cares about Israel, deeply about the people of Israel. Okay? And he's constantly faithful to Israel, even as this is how they interpreted the exiles. Even the exiles were not God's fault. They were our fault as Jews. We did not follow the agreement that we made with God. We did not truly worship him as the only God. We worshipped other gods as well. And so God had to punish us, kind of like purify us in the oven of the exile. So this has to develop, and it's in the exile that people seem to start realizing, hey, the prophets were right. And you see this again in the Bible. If you look at some of the later writings, the book of Ezekiel, which is written, some of these later writings that were written during and after the exile. It's one of the statements that keep saying, no, the prophets were right. We didn't listen to them. Now we have to kind of like get back on the horse and worship only God. The God, who's God, our God of Israel. Still have 1 minute. God bless you all. I'll see you.